civil rights leader and author from San Jose would like to share the stories of other African Americans and how to contribute to the spiritual, educational, and economic development of the Santa Clara Valley. ABC 7 News reporter David Louie joins us live from a historic church in San Jose that's included in a new book. David.
Well, there is a lot of little-known black history in the South Bay, and that's what this author is trying to unveil. First AME Zion Church here in San Jose was the first black church established back in 1864. However, research indicates the first African-American settlers came to this Santa Clara Valley in 1777. Their numbers grew as the economy grew, but they still faced discrimination. 64 years ago, the opening of the Ford Assembly Plant in Milpitas, replacing a facility in Richmond, had a major impact. An influx of African Americans resulted, and many settled in a new community.
It was called the Sunnyvale community, was established in Milpitas. Ben Gross was the mayor, and he actually was one of the very first, he was in that first group of African Americans that came to Milpitas, and he then, there's a street named Gross Street, named after Ben Gross.
The impact of the Ford Auto Plant and the creation of the Valley's tech sector are documented in this new book by San Jose author Jean-Baptiste Adkins. Both helped to shape the black history of San Jose and Santa Clara County. Using church records and oral histories, she also tells the story of Good Brothers House, created in 1955 by Chuck Alexander because black athletes at what was then San Jose State College couldn't get housing.
The discrimination was very evident, so it was important for us to make it. You know, we couldn't fail. You know, that was the deal.
Alexander is a historian in his own right, taking photos of community events since his retirement. Author Adkins believes these stories need to be told and shared.
Many of the history books today may show one or two of the most important civil rights leaders, but they don't understand their immediate community. So the young people get a chance to learn about their immediate community in addition to learning about the civil rights leaders.
The new book by Jean-Baptiste Adkins will be released next week. She's having a book launch event at the San Jose Museum of Art on February 10th. We have details about that event on our website, abc7news.com. We're live in San Jose. David Louie.
The deck collapsed.
Okay, let me introduce Jan. She graduated from the University of Oregon a long time ago. Not that long. Moved to California about 20 years ago. And she continues her education even today. So every summer, there's at least one course that's taken over at Stanford University. Again, continue her education. Jan has a bachelor's degree from University of Oregon. She's got 2 master's degree actually, one in education and the other in English Lit. Jan teaches at San Jose City College, occasionally at Evergreen College. She's taught primary school, middle school, high school, and has been a college instructor now for maybe 10 years. So let me introduce this woman that has a lot of energy, and she's done a lot of digging for information that has served 3 major communities now: Monterey, San Francisco, and now Santa Clara. So let me introduce you to, where'd you go? Jan Adkins.
My better half. Couldn't do it without him. Couldn't do it without so many of you who've supported me throughout these years. For the last, I would say, 10 years as I started the endeavor documenting African American communities. But this is a celebration to celebrate you. For me, this was, I was just the vehicle to do the writing, but all of you and hearing all of your family stories, your legacy, this was about documenting you and your communities and who you represent. And I just want to say thank you so much. With those families who are in the book, please stand up. I won't be able to introduce you, but I want everyone to see who you are. I have the Ellington families, I have the Washington families, I have the McKinney family. Come to find out, the Hortons who are in the book, there is a relative of the Horton family that's here today. I am so honored. There were so many different people who participated in the writing of this book. And my attempt was for everyone who's in the book that I was able to try to locate a family member, the Cannon families, and there are so many different families. And so I attempted to identify those families and contact those families and interview them to hear their family stories. I want to say thank you so much. And it was an honor. It was a labor of love, to be honest with you. It was an honor to meet you. Every time I write these books, there's always someone who I am so honored to talk with. These people sometimes are like 90, 95 years old, and they're people who went before us. They're people who were pioneers in their own right. And I just want to take a few minutes to let you know that there were two people who I interviewed, and I don't even know how I made contact. It was like someone said, oh, you gotta talk to so-and-so, here's a phone number, and all of a sudden, if you go over there and you go over to church, and if you wait after church, maybe you can get a chance to meet that person. Well, I met Robert Ellington. I was like shocked. I said, oh my gosh, this is a family I've been searching for like 2 or 3 years. And I met him, and I had a wonderful interview with him. I had a chance to meet him over about 3 or 4 days at about 2 hours at a time, and he passed away. And I'm just so honored. It happens with all of these books. When I try to identify the legacy of the oldest families, then I'm able to interview them, but sometimes they don't live long enough to see the product, and it just touches my heart. The second person that I interviewed, who is no longer with us today, is Rose Beasley. And Ulysses Beasley is in the book. And so is Rose in the book and their family. And Rose passed away a few weeks ago. And it was such an honor to interview her, to hear her stories about when they moved to California, to San Jose rather, from Fresno, and how he was able to start his practice, as a prosecutor and being the first black prosecutor. And hearing these stories were just really moving for me. And Rose, who's in her 90s, is no longer with us. And so I want us to just take a few minutes and just think about the people that have come before us, who've given us their legacies, and who've touched us. And to be thankful that these people, that we had a chance to journey with them for a short period of time. I know you can think of many others, but I'm honored to have had an opportunity to meet, and not just them, but all of you. And I see here, Mrs. Mary Washington is here, and I know it was so difficult for her to come out today, but I want to say thank you, Jan, for bringing your mother. I'm so honored when we have people who have made their mark in our lives and in our communities, and at that special time in their life, when they're barely able to get around, and they come and they're able to share your presence, and I'm so thank you that you came. So I want to also say not only thank you to the families who are represented in the book, but I also want to say thank you to the archivist. So one of the things I found out doing this research is that all of our histories, doesn't matter which ethnic group or where you live, but history is preserved in our communities. And who are the keepers of the history? The archivists, the historians. They maintain our history. And sometimes we'll find our history in boxes. We have to dig through those boxes, and they're little sheets of paper, and it's like, oh my gosh, where'd you get this? And we have church records here, and we have photographs there, and they're kept in vaults. And then we have historical societies, and they maintain our history. And what I do is I go into those boxes and vaults, and I put on my little white gloves, and I dig through the boxes, and I begin to read the stories. And so these people who were so helpful for me, History San Jose, Catherine Mills, I'm not sure if she's here today, Mary Boyle at Santa Clara Library, Lillian Marshall, the Sarasota Academy, King Library, Dr. Steve Milner was an advisor on this book, Tom Howard, Gilroy Historical Society, Bill Larson, Gilroy Historical Society, Loretta Green, Palo Alto, Steve Stagner, Palo Alto Historical Society, Sean Heiliger at Museum and Library of Oakland, Jean Libby, O.C. Tinsley, and Milan Valentine. Well, they're very special because Arcadia required me to have community support, and I had to have an agency that was willing to say that they felt that my work, that I would produce a good product and that the community would receive my work. And those two organizations approved this particular project. And so I'm so thankful. And I had a chance to meet with them throughout the project to get their feedback and input, and it was just wonderful. And also Reverend Jerry Drino, historian, Jean Libby, and these were people who were affiliated with Trinity Cathedral Episcopal Church, which was the very first church in the area. Not the first black church, but the first church. And so I had a chance to network with people from that church, and these two people were sending me emails all the time. Oh, here we have some new information about the first black family. And we've got the Overtons over here, we've got the Cassis over here. And they just maintained contact over the last 4 years, feeding me information about the early community of the 1800s, the 1850s. These are people who research the early black communities, and they provide that information to researchers. So there's so many people that are in our communities today, and they're the ones that hold the history. They're the ones that are preserving the history, and all we have to do is go to libraries, go to the historical societies, and let them know we're interested and start digging. I also want to acknowledge the elected officials. So I noticed that our city council member was here, and very thankful that he was able to come. Is there anyone else who's an elected official that's here today? Okay. I want to thank Cherise Adkins. Cherise is the one that actually organized and was responsible for this wonderful event today. So I want to thank without her. Yes, family. You see, all these people, my family, they know when I have a project, it becomes a family project. Anyway, so that's what we're all about, family. We're all family in this book. I want to thank so many of you have become friends. I see all of you as friends. Those who journeyed with me on this, you're forever in my heart. And I will always remember you as I pick up this book and think about, oh my gosh, those moments when I thought, can I do this? I'm so sick of this. And so maybe you sent me these emails, how are you doing? How are we coming along? Get to work. So I appreciate so much of all of you, and I just want to say thank you. Well, I'm going to begin discussing the book, but before I do, I just want to mention that we're having a raffle. And so we're going to raffle off 3 of the trilogy of books, which is African Americans of San Francisco, for those who don't know that book, and African Americans of Monterey County, and then my 3rd book, African Americans of San Jose and Santa Clara. So if you don't have your raffle ticket, it's a good time to get it. Some of you are probably wondering, well, what motivated me? Why did I decide to do this? Well, I am a teacher, and my students were asking me questions all the time. We're reading John Steinbeck, we're reading about everyone else that came to California, and they're saying to me, well, what about us? What about our community? Do you know anything about our community? And I said, yeah. I said, well, I'll go and get the information and come back. And when I would go to get the information, I couldn't find anything. I was like, wait a minute. Where's the information about our community? We're reading about the Bay Area. What do we know about the black communities in the Bay Area? And I didn't have answers. So I went back to my students and I said, well, you know what, I don't know, but maybe we should do some research. You guys, they said, us? Why don't you research and come back? And I'm like, as a teacher, we're gonna put it on our students. You guys go and do research. Well, my students at that point were like, no, they realized I didn't know. Obviously, I didn't have the answers. So I said, okay, you're right. Let's all research. So anyway, I started out my journey of researching about the African American communities of the Bay Area, and so that I could provide the context as I'm teaching literature. And that's what started it. And from that moment on, I met so many wonderful people, heard so many wonderful stories, and that's what has kept me wanting to learn and to know more about our communities. So now I would like to just sort of survey the books with you, our book, San Jose. We now have a book, and I'm just delighted that you're here and that we can just take a few minutes, about 15, 20 minutes, I'd like to survey the book, African Americans of San Jose and Santa Clara County. So I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about what I learned. And I think that I don't want to review information that you have already, know. Let's see here. Okay. It's all right. No, I didn't turn it on. It's me. There you go. Didn't have it on. Well, anyway, so the book is comprised of 6 chapters. And the first chapter deals with Black pioneers, and the second chapter, the African American Church. One of the things I've learned is that if you're going to write about the African American communities, you must include the African American Church. That church is where the social, economic, and personal, spiritual things happen in a church. It was sort of like the social service agency, and all of these things happened in the church. And back in the 1800s, everyone, the church was a center point of the community. So I've always dedicated a chapter to the Black church. The 20th century, starting from the 1900s to 1950, then the communities were in a process of building community. When writing about San Jose, there's no way you can write about San Jose and not include San Jose State University and the athletes. So I have included a chapter on San Jose State University, and that's called Educational Opportunities, because that's what it was. It was opportunities for young Black men and women who are athletes to have a chance to pursue their athletic dreams, but also pursue their academic careers too. And the 5th chapter is opportunities for African Americans, because what I found from 1950 to 1990s, there were many, many employment opportunities for African Americans in the field of technology, industry, and so that chapter includes those who were pioneers in the fields, in the areas of technology. And then my last chapter is called Creating Opportunities and Opening Doors. And so what I found is that after we had the opportunities to excel, then we turned around and we made opportunities for others. And that was that's our real story. This is a community that, yes, many people moved and went away, but those people who stayed and continued to make opportunities possible for our young people. And that's what I found. And so that's the very last chapter. So I'm going to review a couple of things, some facts that I discovered. So first of all, one of the things I discovered, and I think this was by accident, I discovered that in 1770s, during the creation of the Pueblo, well, there were 5 Black families. So Black families, meaning they weren't completely, they were mulattoes. And so what happened is that the explorers brought people of African heritage, and they're often termed as Afro-Spaniards, were brought to California in the 1700s. And many of them worked in agriculture, many of them helped to build the missions, many of them helped to build the presidios, many of them worked on the ships. I don't know whether they were slaves. We don't know. It's very hard to, I even tried to find the documentation as to the status of these men, so we don't know. But they came here to California, and that's documented. And then many of them married women of either native race or else Mexicans, and they created families. And then, in this case, 5 of these families were a part of the Pueblo, which is the first town in San Jose. And I read about this at the library, and I thought, can I find evidence of this? Do we have anything to document these families and that this in fact happened? And so I was able to find this chart. And it so happens that this chart is at the library, and this chart identifies the families and the plot of land that they owned. But in addition to this, and in my book you'll see this, I was able to identify because this is on the records, the families that were of mulatto background, of African heritage, African and Spanish heritage. And then I thought, oh, that's interesting. It's at the library, okay. Well, someone interpreted this, and translated it from Spanish to English, but I went to Pueblo Square. And down in Pueblo Square, San Pueblo Square, there is a beautiful monument with this chart and with a discussion of the families and also the ethnicity of the families. And I was very excited to know that this in fact is true. So our presence in San Jose area started in 1777 with our presence as a part of the Pueblo. And what were they doing in the Pueblo? The Pueblo, this was where they raised the food that was sent up to the Presidio in San Francisco, and much of that food went down to the Presidio in Monterey. So that's where they raised the food, they preserved the food, and they transported the food. And so it was a very important job. I also discovered in my research that in one of my previous books, I discovered that Pio Pico was the governor of Alta California. This was in the 1830s. Well, Pio Pico had a cousin by the name of Antonio Maria Pico. And why is Pio Pico important? Because Pio Pico was a mulatto. He had a grandmother who was of African heritage. Well, now Antonio Maria Pico is his cousin, and he was the judge. He was called the alcalde of San Jose in the 1930s. In the 1830s. And this was when this part of San Jose, this part of California, was under Spanish control. And he was appointed as a judge. So here we are. And once again, we're reappearing again in the 1800s, before California was a state. So, many of you are probably wondering, well, what kind of jobs, what did people do? What happened? What kind of employment? Well, many, as you would guess, were servants and cooks and gardeners and miners and laborers and farmers. Many also, I discovered that at the turn of the century, many men worked as porters on the Southern Pacific Railroad and actually lived in a section of Palo Alto, which is called Mayfield. And that's where they lived. And so we had a number of porters, and they began to create the first community of Palo Alto. Well, the whole question of slavery is one that, I think that you probably, and I learned that California was a free state. There were 13 free states, and California was a free state. There were no slaves in California. I even had a college professor when I was working on my master's at San Jose State. Then I did my first book, and it was about literature, poetry, and short stories. And my master's thesis coordinator said, there were no slaves in California. I said, oh yes, no. He said, no, California is a free state. You cannot put that in your book. There were no slaves in California. Okay, then tell me that again. I told her, I said, no, yeah, that's what the history books are going to tell us, but guess what? I've got manumission papers in this book. There were manumission papers. There were abolitionists, and the black community set up safe homes, and people were able to go, slaves were able to leave their ownership and go and stay in safe homes in the community. And there were others who would sue the owners because the slaves were allowed to stay in California. So in my book, there are two sets of manumission papers, one for Samson Cleves and Plym Jackson. And they were owned by a person whose last name is Finley. It was John Finley. And so I was able to, these papers are housed at History San Jose under safekeeping, and they wanted to prove that yes, slaves were maintained here in California. But here was what happened. So California was a free state, but California allowed plantation owners to bring their slaves to California, but they could only keep them here for 2 or 3 years. And then they had to take them out of state. We had the Archie Lee case up in San Francisco, which was that same kind of battle. So, and if the slaves were kept too long, people in the community would complain. So there were people that didn't want slavery. There were white people that didn't want slaves in California because they felt that these other white people who owned the slaves had some kind of extra effort that they're able to become successful on the back of somebody else. And here they were, they couldn't afford to own slaves, so they resented those slave owners bringing their slaves to California. So we had that problem. And then in addition to that, you had the abolitionists that fought to make sure that California was not going to become a state where slaves are bought and sold and maintained. But, you know, the California history does show, though, that there are many people here who, in addition to not wanting slaves in California, also didn't want black people to relocate in California either. So it was really difficult. You had those two things, that battle going on between, over the issue of slavery. So this is one case of one of the early pioneers. And he came, so what I did discover in my research in all three books is that slaves were brought to California and they worked in the mines, and they were able to buy their freedom because there was a place called the Negro Bar. The Negro Bar is where all the black people could go and pan for gold. But guess what? There was a lot of gold there. And so nobody wanted to go because they thought it was like, you know, this isn't very prosperous, but it was. And so there are many stories of black miners that were able to pan for gold. They got to keep the gold that they found in the Negro Bar, and they were then were able to buy their freedom. When I went to Placerville last summer, there is in fact a park, and there's a monument dedicated to the Negro Bar. And so if you go to, it's a wonderful way to take your kids on a field trip or grandkids. And the whole California mining, in fact, there's a monument that honors the work of the black miners there. So that's a real place. It was a real place, and even today, it's a part of a park called the Negro Bar. But anyway, so James Williams became one of the first residents of San Jose. Once he bought his freedom, he moved to Murphy Ranch and worked. And so we have a real significant person I discovered. And discovered this person, I guess, with my first book, Peter Williams Cassie. And Peter Williams Cassie first came to California in the 1950s and moved to San Francisco. But in the 1960s, he then moved down to San Jose. He became a deacon. He joined the Trinity Cathedral Episcopal Church, which was a white church, and they ordained him as a deacon in 1866. At the same time, in this particular church, there were not many, but there were several black families that were a part of the church. They were christened in the church, received their confirmation, were married in the church, lots of different things. And so what happened is that the black members of the church wanted to have a place to practice their own religion. And so Peter Cassie became the person that provided the spiritual leadership. Out of that group, they were able to start their own church, which was the first black church, AME Zion Church, First AME Zion. Peter Cassie is important too, not only because he was the first person who was a deacon, but he started the first school. So there was a school called St. Philip's Mission School, and this was a school where black kids could go to school. This was during a time when black kids were not able to go to school with white kids. So the black community wanted their own school. So there was an elementary school, and it wasn't just for black kids. These were for native kids were able to attend the school, and also Asian kids were able to attend the school, Chinese primarily. And so Peter Cassie also started a second school, which was called Vixonian Academy. So he is very well respected because of his efforts to strive for education. In addition to that, Peter Cassie was one person who helped to create what was called the Colored Convention. And the purpose of the Colored Convention was to fight the discriminatory laws that California had on the books. One such law was that black people couldn't testify against white people. It wasn't just black people though. People of color, because Indians couldn't testify against a white person, neither could the Chinese or black people. And so Peter Williams Cassie was also very instrumental in starting an organization that was in place to, number one, to make sure that after the Civil War, black men were able to vote with the 15th Amendment, but also fought to overturn some of the discriminatory laws that were in place. This photograph here simply shows, this was in a San Jose newspaper, and it's called, so the article, this was an ad that read San Jose School for for colored students. And of course, that was the terminology at that time. And there's a photograph of a school. Now, what I discovered is that there were 3 black schools in the Bay Area. One in San Francisco, one in San Jose, and one in Sacramento. So education was very, very important to the black community. So this slide is very important too, because the 4 men at the bottom, these were men who created what was called the Afro-American League. And once again, the purpose of the Afro-American League was to fight the discrimination laws and also to make sure that black men were registered to vote. And so these were the men that belonged to the Overton family that came together and formed this league along with others. And also, that was Alfred White, who owned a barbershop, and that's his barbershop. This was in the 1860s. Oh, one of the things I discovered is that at our library right here in San Jose, the artwork, sorry. Okay, so Edmona Lewis was a famous sculptress, and she was created art during the late 1800s. Well, her art was on display here in San Jose. The San Jose Library bought her one piece of art, which was the bust of Abraham Lincoln, and it was purchased in 1873. That bust is at the library today. It is still there, and is housed in the California room. And I thought, well, who's Edmona Lewis? Well, one summer, it was last summer, we had a chance to take a trip to go to the African American Museum. I told my husband, I said, wait a minute, but I need to go to the Portrait Museum too, so I can find a picture of Edmona Lewis. It was impossible to find a photograph of her, but there's her photograph. And she was the one who actually created this art. And all 3 pieces, actually the library of San Jose has acquired 3 pieces of her art. And those are in the book. So I'm just going to kind of highlight a little bit. I kind of wanted to spend more time with the early chapters, but I want to just highlight a little bit tell you a little bit about the black church. Let's see. So there were 3 black churches that formed in the 1800s or early 1900s. And one I mentioned earlier, First AME Zion Church, was formed out of the group of people that worshiped with William Cassie. They formed their first church, First AME Zion, in 1863. And it was on 4th Street in San Fernando, I believe. 4th Street, 4th Street on the San Jose campus site. And that was where the church was until about 1968. And at that time it was moved to where it is today on 20th Street. So this is a photograph of the church on 20th Street. There was also Antioch Baptist Church. It was formed in 1863. And that church is on San Julian, and it is still there today. And then the 3rd church is University AME Zion Church. So this is the original church, a photograph after it had been remodeled several times. It was started in 1918, and this is in Palo Alto. And they've moved to another site. But those 3 black churches that were early 1800s, early 1900 churches are still in existence today. So my chapter 3 talks about the 20th century, and with the 20th century, one of the things I learned was that the Great Migration didn't happen just over a few years. The Great Migration started in the 1900s and continued through the 1950s. And black population was very small, 1900s, 251 black people out of 60,000, out of total population of 60,000. But that number began to just explode throughout the 20th century. The African American community was established in North San Jose. And so San Jose High School was a high school where many people attended, and many people went to Roosevelt Middle School. And today we see that African Americans are dispersed throughout the entire city. So we don't have an intact black community, but we did at one time. A couple of people to mention that I didn't know anything about this person named Sam McDonald, and he wrote a book, and I read his book. It was so interesting. But he was born in the South. He came to live in Gilroy in the 1890s with his dad and his brother, and they worked on a farm. Well, the story is told that from his book, that his dad decided he wanted to move to the state of Washington. So they traveled to Washington on horseback. And halfway there, when he got to Klamath area of Oregon, the young Sam McDonald said he wasn't going any further. He wanted to go back to California where it was warm. So he got on his horse and turned around and rode back to California as a teenager. But I guess these were, this may have been normal in those days. Anyway, so he lived in San Jose, he lived all over the place. But he finally settled in Stanford, up in Palo Alto rather, in the early 1900s, 1903. He worked on the Stanford campus from 1903 to 1954. Well, in his book, he talks about a convalescent home for children, for disabled children. And he would go and barbecue, and he did handyman work for many, many years at this convalescent home. When Sam McDonald died, they named the convalescent home the McDonald House. The Sam McDonald House. And we've heard of Ronald McDonald House. No. Palo Alto Stanford's house was the Sam McDonald House, named after Sam McDonald. So it makes me wonder, how did we get this one? But yeah, Sam McDonald, and the home is still today, it's named after him. Sam McDonald, in the meantime, he was a person who bought a lot of land, and buy up land with his money. He died owning 40 acres of land, and in his will, he dedicated that land to Stanford. Stanford, in turn, sold some of the land to San Mateo County. And San Mateo created a park. The park is called the Sam McDonald Park. I've heard of the Sam McDonald Park. It's there, right? But I didn't know it was about this park was Sam McDonald was a black man who acquired the land, and he wanted the land to be used for recreational use too. So that was really important that they honored his desires. We have Seaman Harris, ran a boot black shop in 1896 on Stanford campus. Then his son started Fran's Market, and Fran's Market still exists today. Continued his dad's legacy of business. Then I discovered down in Gilroy, of all places, I went to visit the Gilroy Historical Society to find out about the black community in Gilroy, and they were so excited. They wanted to tell me all about Ivy Anderson. And Ivy Anderson lived in Gilroy from 1903 to 1917 from her early birth, and she went to high school, and she decided to leave Gilroy, but she had a beautiful voice. In the 1930s, she joined the Duke Ellington Band, and she performed all around the world, but she often went back to Gilroy to perform and to see her friends. And so here I went to Gilroy, and they told me, well, you need to go to this music shop over here, the Porcello Music Shop. So I went there, and sure enough, on the wall were all these pictures of Ivy Anderson. And the Porcello family were just so excited that I came to visit, and they're excited because they have the photographs of Ivy Anderson, and they were very gracious to allow me to include some of her photographs in the book. And so Ivy Anderson is very well respected. She's a local town hero in Gilroy, and so staying with Duke Ellington, one of the very first women to do that. And of course, the Rib family. The Rib family, most of you probably know their story, but the one part that I thought was really interesting was that when Henry Ribs decided, well, his son was swimming, Bunny Ribs was swimming, wanted to go swimming in a swimming pool up in Allen Rock Park. And they told him, and he was with his class, and all the classmates could get in the water, but he couldn't get in the water. And they told him no because he was black. And so his father said, oh no, went and got the mayor, went over there, and they integrated the swimming pool. His son was able to swim in the water. From that moment on, black kids had a place to swim. So anyway, that pretty much concludes the early 20th century, parts of the early 20th century. So I'm going to switch to San Jose State. All I want to say, you know much about this, but one of the things I learned was that it was impossible for athletes to find housing in the 1950s and 1960s at San Jose State. So here they are, recruited to perform and to join the teams in wrestling, football, basketball, track and field, but there was no place to live. And that was just shocking. So then I read about this place called the Good Brothers Pad, and I said, Good Brothers Pad, who's that? Oh, and then I said, oh, Mr. Chuck Alexander, I know him. Well, and then I found pictures at History San Jose of his good brothers, Pat, and his father is in a picture. And this was dated 1950s. And then the story is that the young men, the athletes, were having to live in the equipment shacks. And so it was Chuck Alexander who, with his father, who was able to rent a house, and then they were able to provide housing. And he told me, I don't know, this might be a little fable, but he's here, you can ask him if it's true. But he told me there were up to 30 people. He said they slept wherever they could find a spot. and that was housing until the university decided to provide proper housing for their athletes. And of course, you know, the Speed City team, 1968, you guys know all about that. But I found this wonderful photograph of the team, and I wanted to include it. Of course, when we talk about the San Jose State, rather, you've got to mention Dr. Harry Edwards. He was the one that helped to address some of the discrimination problems that the athletes were facing on campus. And he founded the Olympic Project for Human Rights. And of course, the photograph now of the statues in San Jose State. Those statues are currently there on the campus, and that's of the protest that was at the 1968 Olympics in Mexico. Well, so I'm going to just go quickly through this next section. So 1950s, 1990s, I call this a point of opportunities. This is sort of identify some of the first. So we had the first, Mr. Philip Ellington, who was the first mail carrier in 1947. He also became the first volunteer auxiliary police. And then we also have Mr. Francis Tanner Jr. He was the first black police officer. And their family members are here, by the way. Don't forget to say hello to them. Wait, you guys, wait. Oh, she just walked out, okay. Yes, okay. 1947 was the first mail carrier, 1947, yes. And Francis Tanner was the first black police officer in 1949, 1950s. Then we have the next first. We have in public safety, we have Robert Osby, who was the chief of San Jose's fire department from 1985 to 1992. He was hired, now he was the first black fire chief, and he hired the first black female firefighter. And then we have Walter Adkins, and he served in the police department from 1969 to 1998. He occupied every single rank, and he became acting chief in 1998. And since his retirement, he's been giving back to the community by teaching young people at Evergreen Valley College. More first. Well, there's the first black firefighter that Chief Osby hired, and her name is Teresa DeLoach Reed. She might be here, I'm not sure if she's here. But anyway, oh, she is here, there she is. Oh, thank you. So she was the very first black female firefighter. There were other females, but she's the first black female firefighter in 1986. And she also became the very first black chief of the fire department in Oakland. More first, we had Lodoris Cordell, a Stanford grad. She served on the bench from 1982 to 2000. She served on municipal court, family court, and superior court. And has since served on the Palo Alto City Council, and she was a police auditor for San Jose. So for her, in the book, you'll see a photograph of this photograph, but there's also a photograph of her as a little girl sitting up on a bench, sitting so straight and tall. I just love that because, you know, it was destined. She was destined way back then that she was going to sit on a bench. She was practicing. So anyway, our first. And of course, we had our first lawyer that became a public defender. The very first black public defender was Steve Stevens. And he served in the public defender's office from 1972 to 1990. And we also have the Beasley family, and he was the first African-American prosecutor in the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office. And he retired in 1989. Both, Rose died, and he passed on too. our first. I don't know, do we have representatives from those families here? Yes, they're right there, okay. Steve Stevens, yes, all right. Yes, we have to recognize the first because it's really hard. It's difficult when you're the first one. And you're having, everyone's looking at you like, are you different or how are you? And these people had to, they were the ones that had to open the doors for others. So yeah, I really believe in. Okay, we have our first elected officials, of course. Iola Williams, she was the first black African American to serve on San Jose City Council. We also have Roy Clay, he was the first Palo Alto, he was the first black person to serve on Palo Alto City Council. And he was also a tech giant, tech pioneer. You guys probably know a lot about him, but we'll hear about him a little later. And then we have, of course, Ben Gross, and he served on the city council, and he was the mayor of Milpitas, and he served from 1962 to 1971, the first mayor, black mayor of Milpitas. Then, we have community activists. Well, Inez Jackson. When I started my research, everyone said, you gotta include Inez Jackson. She came here trained as a teacher from someplace in the Midwest, I believe it was Oklahoma, it's in the book. And she came to San Jose and she wasn't able to teach. It would not allow her, it would not hire her in the school districts of the Bay Area, any of them, to work. So she went to work for the Postal Service. And she was so dedicated and interested in education that it was her wish to have started the Inez Jackson Library. And today, that is in fact a reality. So I'm really excited to have had a chance to learn about her. And Carl Ray, we've got to give, he has to be recognized in any book. Carl Ray was a person who worked so diligently to make sure that black students had access to the historical black colleges. So every single year, for 26 years, he took students to the South, to black colleges, so they can get exposed to that and then have the opportunity to apply. And so he's no longer with us today, but we do want to recognize him. More first, well, we happen to have the first African American to serve as a chancellor for one of our major college districts. So this is San Jose San Jose Evergreen Community College District, and Dr. Byron Breland, and he is our chancellor. And we also have Keith H., who was the first black president of Evergreen Valley College. I think Mr. H. is here. Thank you. And of course we have Tommy Fulcher, Mr. Tommy Fulcher, who was responsible for the ESO program in 1982 to 2007. And Sandra McNeil, is Sandra McNeil here? Sandra McNeil is from Morgan Hill. And Sandra McNeil worked for many years for Abbott Company in technology, but she actually in retirement started a program for the students there at Morgan Hill High School, and those students are given, the program is a program that helps students learn employment skills, and so it's an employment skills program. And she also provides mentoring, and they also provide opportunities for kids to work in industry in the Morgan Hill area. And so the Chamber of Commerce they've been giving her lots of awards for her hard work and dedication to the children of Morgan Hill. And so, yes, we want to also recognize her too. So I included her in the book for her dedication to our young people. So, and for technology, because there's so many, you have to read the book. You want to read about each of these people? We have Roy Clay, Control Data, came in 1961, Frank Green, Fairchild, 1960. Elroy Smith, IBM, 1962. Rufus White, IBM, 1969. Wilbur Jackson, IBM, 1976. Ken Coleman, IBM, 1972. Francine Wright Belson, Fairchild, 1978 to 1992. Now, what's interesting about these people is that these people, not only were they dedicated to their particular companies, but they also went out into the Black community, and they established programs to reach out to young people and to help young people who are interested in going into technology. Some of them traveled to historical Black colleges. They helped with setting up recruitment programs and helped to recruit Black engineers and Black professionals to the companies here, and some of them even today, like Francine Belson, who actually continues the effort after retirement, continues reaching out to young people and in technology and sharing her great wisdom as a physicist. Thank you so much. I have to tell a little story about Francine. I was at a presentation of some type, and Francine was talking. I said, Francine Wright. I think that name sounds familiar. And then I found out she went to MIT. Well, she was at MIT the same year I was at MIT, and all of a sudden we looked at each other, we remembered, you remember me? You remember me? And we hugged, and yes. So she actually went to grad school. We went to grad school together. I left, she stayed, she became a physicist, I went back home. Anyway, I went on into literature and writing and history. Francine, she's worked in technology in the Bay Area since 1978. She's done a wonderful job with young people. 1974, thank you. You see, that's why we need you. Anyway, so, then I discovered this woman by the name of Lula Bridges. And many of you may know her, but she created the first modeling agency for girls of color. And then she had this dream of establishing a history center. And so when working with O.C. Tinsley and his wife Maddie, Lula died, and O.C. and Maddie continued her dream. And so today, they explained to me that it was the Heritage House, the African American Heritage House at History Park, is due to Lola Bridges and her dedication to the Black community. We can't talk about the Black community and not talk about nightlife, right? Or any community. Steve Jackson. Steve, are you here? Okay, how about Walter Huddleston? They're not here. Oh, there you are. Okay, yes. Thank you so much for your contribution. Yes. Yeah, so these two men, Steve Jackson is the owner of the Blue Note. So you read about this in my book, 1970. Walter Huddleston, he owned the living room and the second movement and the Swahili Club. And so they were there to make sure that we had places to go to kind of relax so we have to include nightlife in our book when we talk about history. Yes.
Don't forget the jumping frog.
Oh, the jumping frog? Oh, you didn't tell me about that one. Okay. So anyway, and I end the book with, and there's so many people. I mean, I couldn't include everybody in the PowerPoint, but you'll read. If I didn't mention you, you're in the book, so read about yourself. But I have to recognize under the first, Debbie Thomas, gotta give her credit. She won the bronze medal at the Winter Olympics in Calgary in 1988, and she was from San Jose. When I read about her story, she went to school. She went to elementary school. She was homeschooled, and she was in special schools because her mother had her training towards in skating. So she went to special schools, but she was raised right here in San Jose. She went to San Jose State University, and she also went to Stanford, and she won the bronze for the Winter Olympics. And then, of course, our ambassador of jazz, Eddie Gale. And so I just want to say that so many of you are so important. All of you are important. And I end the book with a millennial. I said, isn't there a millennial around that's done something? Yes, there's a millennial who did something, went to high school right here in San Jose, and gave back to his community, came back to San Jose, didn't have to, gave back to his community, started a youth program, a youth camp last summer, and invited lots of kids. I went, there were like 100 or some plus kids at the youth camp. And then turned around and wrote a check to the high school. Now that is dedication to San Jose. So out of his earnings, he gave back to his high school. And that's Steve Anderson. Thank you, Steve. I didn't mention, he plays in the NFL. So. Thank you very, very much, all of you. This was a special journey for me. It was wonderful getting to know you, wonderful hearing your stories. And there are so many more of you that are in the book that I could have mentioned, but I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. You're forever in my heart.
Mr. Huddleston, I'll learn how to do the bump in your club. There's a couple of people that we need to recognize. First of all, the Dick's Catering Company, young lady back there that put this all together. By the way, you folks are eating off the line, so we got lots of stuff here. So grab something here, or a little baggy to go, or something like that. I also want to recognize the drummers. If I had any talent that I wanted to pursue, and this is honest to God truth, I've always wanted to play the conga, because that music, that's heartbeat. That's coming right out of soul. There's no question about that. The percussion. So you folks did a wonderful job in entertaining us that way. I guess we have a raffle going on. I don't know if you had a chance to buy the raffle tickets, but all three editions of the book will be presented to someone. And then we mentioned this young man, Jan mentioned this young man that gave so much back to the Piedmont Hills High School community. He's here. He played 2 years with the Texans as tight end. He also will be getting a Super Bowl ring because he had been traded to the Patriots Super Bowl. And so we can expect him to be on the field next year. Again, I'd like to thank, there's so many friends, and Jan probably could recognize almost half the people in this room that helped put this together. But let me point out a couple of special people that, for all three books, and contributed in varying ways to have this this program, is my two friends from Santa Cruz County. Would you stand up? Stand up. Yeah, these ladies have really been important in this project. I think that's it. If you haven't seen the rest of the museum, you should take a minute to browse through it. A lot of folks don't know that it's here, but it has lots of displays. And that's it.